Well, hey there. Today I want to talk about Edward Van Halen. I feel particularly shook up about Ed, and I'm just going to dive into the reason why. I think in the guitar world, in the guitar underworld, there are two fundamental schools of thought, fundamental roots of the tree that inspire players. And I would say those are Hendrix and Van Halen. Now, I know there's plenty of people that will disagree with me on this, but just hear me out. I'm not super married to this. I just think it's a interesting thought experiment. All right. I think there's almost like the Hendrix school, which is what I would call a looser style. And then there's kind of the Eddie Van Halen school, which comes from what I would even argue is the Clapton school, which I would say maybe has a bit more of a precise sound. To my ear, Hendrix has always had this beautiful mess kind of playing that he does, where he blends rhythm and lead playing with noise. That's the thing. And then I would argue that he, at his time, obviously set a technical benchmark that was very high as far as his facility on the instrument. But I think that it's quite clear that Eddie totally shifted the paradigm of what people thought was possible. And particularly in a pre-internet era, he did something. He had a sound that was so him. And that's true of all great players, obviously. But I think that the Eddie school, it obviously spanned an entire generation of guitarists, or it inspired so clearly all of what was metal, and particularly hair metal. In my opinion, all hair metal is just following the Van Halen archetype. And there's a lot of hair metal that I really like. And yet I don't think anyone in their right mind could say that, like, if they are a hair metal person, that is not extremely Van Halen influenced. Now, the people that I'd put in the Hendrix school would be like Stevie, obviously, Stevie Ray Vaughan, John Frusciante, guys in Pearl Jam. To me, they're clearly of that school. All the guitar playing is very much in a Hendrixy vein, and I think if you play, it's pretty clear that you hear that, right? You're hearing those Hendrix style chord inversions. You're hearing the Hendrix style lead playing. A lot of times, the choice of effects. You know, you got the wah on the guitar solos. You got more of a jammy improvisational ethos of the bands, right? You look at the Chili Peppers, you look at Pearl Jam. I would say there's some serious jamming there. And so I put that all under the Hendrix umbrella, and that has never died, and it never will, and it never should. And I particularly even look at a few of my musician friends, and I see very clearly that they're of the Hendrix school, that Hendrix, that you know, Hendrix is the person that has so inspired them and influenced their style. And so then when I look at my own playing and I look at what has really turned me on, Hendrix has never had that visceral thing where it's clear that that's my guy, my style, my sound. And yet I do remember very vividly the first time I heard Van Halen that it was that for me, of like, holy shit, what is this? What is this? And for some people, that exact feeling is with Hendrix. And I think that it's, you know, there's just a small handful of players that probably have done that to almost every musician and guitar player. But for me, that was Van Halen. And that's why his passing and this time that the whole music world is taking to reflect on his influence is just, it hits me harder than I think it hits a lot of people. And so again, when I look back in my playing history, it was like I started with loving pop punk and, Blink and Green Day. And then hearing Van Halen was the next thing that made me think, wow, this makes me want to be a guitar player. And let's see. I would say the difference between the Hendrix school and the Van Halen school, by the way, I think the Van Halen school is also inseparable from the Clapton school. So even when I look back and IAB Cream to Hendrix, I would say that Cream to me, and I'm not saying this in a positive or negative way, but I think it's more precise. That's what it sounds like to me. Clapton's playing is just more precise. Like he doesn't toy with feedback in the way that Hendrix did. Hendrix has this beautiful, trippy mess thing. And to me, Clapton is still just as much of a rock god as Hendrix is. And yet it's just got a bit more of a clarity of playing, in my opinion. And I've heard a number of places that Ed cites Clapton as really his only influence. I'm sure he's had others, but I think that I've heard it said that he learned like all of Cream's catalog, all of Clapton's music. He learned it when he was coming up. Clapton was his guy. And that's what I'm saying is I think that there are these just two different forks in the road. Like Frusciante's amazing, but his skill set is not and his sound is not the Van Halen thing and sound. And so I would argue that like basically all of metal, or the vast majority of metal, with the exception of maybe like Doom, is of the Clapton, Van Halen school and ethos. That has had infinite number of permutations. For example, I think Yngwie came along and again raised the bar of technicality and totally set a paradigm for what is possible. But Yngwie's, from what I can gather, so cocky that he would probably never admit that he had any influences. Well, he has Deep Purple and Paganini, but I don't think Yngwie would be willing to admit how indebted he is to Van Halen for even what he does. But whatever, that doesn't really matter. I am just saying that the high gain shredding thing, the brown sound that Eddie created for a lot of guitar players is the guitar sound they hear in their head, whether they know it or not. That is what is so powerful. I think for some people, the Hendrix sound is the guitar sound they hear in their head. And some of that is even single coil pickups versus humbucking pickups. Well, that high gain, massive sound, as far as I can tell, Ed, that combined, I mean, it was just everything that he did, right? That combined with the Floyd Rose and the amount of control and precision that gave him. See, I think that's even part of it is, you take a Strat and you're screwing with the whammy bar, and nine times out of 10, if you do it long enough and aggressive enough, you're going to start to have pitch issues. Versus, Floyd Rose, you could theoretically do it until a string breaks. And so the amount of precision that you get from the style, from those tools, and Ed just wrapped it all together in such a coherent way, and the way that he used amplification and obviously the internet is just full of all of the people chasing that tone. But that's just what I'm saying, is his sound is so important. It can't really be overstated. So I think there's probably not a lot of people that would argue with me on that. But the maybe controversial thing I do have to say on the subject is I think that Ed, it's kind of like Ed either grabs you or Hendrix grabs you. I think there's very few people that it's equal. And to me, Ed grabbed me. Like, oh my goodness, this is from another universe. Now, a couple other things. I think that Van Halen is one of the most interesting things about the band is that's the two eras of the two different frontmen, in my opinion, are so different that it's kind of amazing they kept the same band name. Obviously, I understand why they did. It totally makes sense. But the point I'm making is, to me, it's just incredible how David Lee Roth is so his thing. Like that, he managed to take that loungy thing, this like faux Sinatra kind of cornball thing, and just make it so fun and wonderful. And yet, Sammy Hagar is insanely good as a musician. He is a standalone great lead guitar player. And I would argue one of the most unappreciated voices in rock music from a technical perspective. It is unbelievable how good he is as a vocalist. And you go back and you watch the stuff live, he sounds amazing. It just blows me away how good Sammy Hagar is, even just in a technical sense. Now, if I'm going to put on Van Halen, 9 times out of 10, I'm still going to put on David Lee Roth. But, man, Sammy Hagar is still amazing. And the, I don't know. I just think that the two eras of that band, I really love them both. And I love them for different reasons. I think David Lee Roth's obvious shortcomings as a musician added to the magic of what early Van Halen was. As far as I know, David Lee Roth doesn't play guitar, or if he does, he doesn't do it very much. And that the interesting thing is those shortcomings, the way the band adapted and created their sound around that, is what made some of the magic. I would argue the greatest, well, not the greatest, but another very great example of that would be the Chili Peppers, where the musicianship is so strong in the instruments, in the instrumentalists, that the singer's lack of musicianship ends up creating this counterbalance that makes the magic of it. And that weakness almost becomes a strength. Versus Sammy Hagar is so damn good that it turned Van Halen into a supergroup. And so those weaknesses in David Lee Roth's part, like it's clear the lack of vocal technique he has in certain parts of his range. It's clear that he can do the really high, squeaky, ums and ahs and yas, and then he's got quite a low register available to him. But he tends to do that jumping quite a bit, where I would say the trickiest part for any singer is the bridge, right? The bridge between your chest and head voice. And again, speaking as someone who is still very much in the process of working on his voice and not an expert, but from what I can gather from what I know about vocal technique, that is clearly David Lee Roth's thing, is he never quite got a handle on the break. And it's not even like he got any better at that with time. Like when Van Halen reunited with him, whenever it was in the 2000s or the early 2010s, he just hasn't put in a lot of work to his voice. He just hasn't done a lot of work. Now, part of it is that's what you get with David Lee Roth. David Lee Roth is the party boy. If it feels good, I'm going to do it. If it doesn't, I won't. Life of the party thing. That's his thing. And so it's kind of a take it or leave it thing. And I got a feeling that's always been David Lee Roth's attitude. Like, yeah, this is it. We're going to rage and have fun. And I'm not going to do scales and any of that bullshit. I'm not going to do vocal drills. I'm just going to be David Lee Roth, and that's worked for me so far. And it has, and it did. And part of it is because he is so damn entertaining. And back in the day, he was so damn, just all of it. The chest hair and the leotards and the high kicks and the spangles and the shit talking. It was all amazing. And so it just didn't really matter. It still doesn't matter that he's not a technical singer. And yet Sammy Hagar is so much more, in my opinion, of a technical vocalist. And who knows, maybe I mean Sammy Hagar's also very much a party boy, but maybe when he was really young, I don't know enough about Sammy Hagar, I'm sorry, to know his background of where all that vocal technique came from. If he's much of a arduous guy with, how disciplined he is. Okay, I'll take a quick sidetrack and say that I think 9 times out of 10, all of our musical heroes try to downplay how hard they actually worked at their craft, because there's something about like when techniques start to click and momentum starts to really build in your musicianship, there's something about it where people then start to treat you like, oh, you can just do this thing. It's amazing. You've got a gift. They call it a gift, like it's a finished product done and you have a thing, instead of like what it felt like for you, where it was this incremental building thing. And as time goes, you forget those increments and what they felt like. So then eventually you get high on your own supply. Yes, I have this gift. Yes, it's amazing. But like, you just weren't born with it. Now, I will say there are some people that progress so much faster than others that talent is an extremely real thing. Absolutely, talent is real. But the point I'm making is just that finished product, that gift thing, I think that's a funny slippery slope sort of idea that like that can on one hand be very legitimate as a theory, and on one hand it's bullshit. And I think both things are simultaneously true. That talent is real and that talent is not real, in the sense that talent is a cultivated set of failures pointed in a goal-oriented direction over time, usually started at a young enough age where at a later age someone forgets what built this thing. Maybe all of that is a bunch of silly word salad, but anyways. Let's see, a few of the other things I wanted to say about Ed in what is my my attempt at doing a reverential brain dump to a musician that has been so inspiring to me. I would say that what Ed did to virtuosity, the term virtuoso, I think is very interesting in music and in the guitar world, right? Because I think people first of all, virtuoso is just like anything else, it's a subjective term in my opinion. Clearly, Yngwie is a virtuoso, but for some people, they don't like it. Now, for other people, they can listen to the Chili Peppers nonstop and love every note John Frusciante plays. And I would argue John Frusciante has his own blend of virtuosity that is not it pound for pound. John Frusciante, if you were to count notes per second in a nerd sense, he doesn't play as many notes in an average musical scale of time compared to what you'd call shredders, of which I'd argue, of course, that Eddie is a shredder and that Ed sort of invented what is called shredding. Well, anyways, the point is virtuosity is a interesting topic in musicianship because for some people it means a specific thing. For some people, virtuosity means you can play fast. You can play fast, precise music. But in my opinion, John Frusciante is as much of a virtuoso as Yngwie, because his ability, some of what virtuosity is, in my opinion, to me, a virtuosity is a complete command of your sound. So John Frusciante has very much a distinct sound. I would even argue by the same metric that The Edge is a virtuoso. Now, a lot of people very compellingly would say, well, then you have diluted the term virtuosity so much that it is now meaningless because The Edge can't shred, brah, and he totally can't. But what he can do is sound like no one else on earth and has a complete command of his thing that he does that so many people have been influenced by that are probably even unaware of. Like, I should do a whole separate rant on The Edge, but luckily, thank you, Edge, thank you, universe, thank you, God. Edge is still, as far as I can tell, doing yoga, alive and kicking. Hopefully he's got a lot more years, but we never know how those things will go with our heroes. Now, the point I'm making is I think virtuosity that's how I define virtuosity. I define it as a complete command of your sonic territory. You know what the territory is, you know what you can and can't do, but what you choose to do, you sound like no one else, and you deliver on your combination of techniques and effects and everything else that goes into personal musicianship. You have your sound, and you are the best at that. And in my personal opinion, that should be everyone's goal. And when I was younger, and for so many years of my musicianship, I have kicked my own ass. I have felt so much resistance over the fact that I just don't sound like these people. And I try and I labor over it, and I can't sound like them. And then the problem is even if you arrive at that place where, let's say you would record a song that sounded exactly like The Edge from U2 or exactly like Van Halen. You play all Van Halen's licks, you copy his tone or whatever. What is the real reward for doing that? Well, you would impress a certain number of people, particularly like people that are really into that fan base. You could probably start a tribute band to that artist and do really well. So there are rewards to that, and there's some people, by the way, that are musicians that I even know and love and respect in my personal circle, that is their aspiration, is to sound like other dudes as much as possible. And I have put a lot of time and energy into trying to do that. And what I've realized is, at least the way I'm wired, I will never be able to. I will never be able to do an amazing Eddie Van Halen impression. And even if I can, if you're super into it, if you're super into Ed, you'll be like, yeah, that was good. That was good. I mean, you're no Ed, but that was good. It was good. That was a B+ Van Halen. And but you could spend thousands of hours trying to be someone else, and you just can't. And yet, all the guys that we look up to are so them. So what is the fucking point of doing anything other than trying to be the best version of you? You can't be your heroes. They're already them, and they do it better than you'll ever be able to. So the only thing you should do is take influence from these people. That's just the thought experiment to me that has to transpire in every musician's mind at a certain point. Because, and for some people, I think from day one, by the way, this is easy for them. This has taken me over a decade to actually buy into, to stop beating myself up for not being my heroes, and instead try and just take bits and pieces of inspiration and sound and effects and just a little bit here and say, well, now what is my opinion about this person's playing and their sound and how they did it? And that's, to me, that's again why Ed is so amazing, is that there's so much that is there to inspire, because he's such a well-rounded musician. I mean, let's even talk about his backing vocals. No one ever talks about Ed as a backing vocalist. He was a really good singer in his capacity. Like, a lot of those long held out backing vocals in Van Halen, like in You Really Got Me and stuff, if you ever sang those in a band context, you have to have some support. You have to have your vocals together to be able to sing, you know. So when it's grrr, to be able to even just sustain a note reasonably well, that's singing. That's serious singing. You know what I'm talking about? Like, grrr, yeah. Yeah. Like, to be able to just, that's singing. It's amazing. And he's doing that while being one of the greatest, you know, lead players. It's that thing. To me, he's in that territory of playing lead and rhythm so effortlessly, so coherently. His sound is so coherent. And where the fuck did it come from? It came from Clapton. But other than that, it came from space. It was a complete amalgamation of gear, using gear in a novel way. From the Floyd Rose to his way of gain staging, to his use of the Phase 90. It's just everything. There's so many. He took all those things, and then clearly his focus in his own technique was curiosity, exploration. There's no way that, in my opinion, I think Ed got this revelation that I'm trying to talk about earlier in life than at least I did. Maybe very early, where it's like, well, what do I want to say? What do I want to do? How can I be different? How can I be the most me that I can be, instead of being a Clapton clone? Because I hear a lot of playing, in particularly 70s rock playing, that to me is like, yeah, I can tell you liked Clapton a lot. I hear Clapton's vocabulary in your playing. And yet there's not a lot of you in there. But Ed managed to take that Clapton vocabulary into outer space and make his whole other vocabulary with it. And I understand that there is a component of, like, you got to be certain, you got to have a certain wiring to do that, right? Because the amount of hours that would take, and I couldn't imagine Ed would be an easy guy to get along with, and I would imagine that's also why he went through all the singer-related issues that he did, is because it would, the only way to get that damn good and be that damn unique is by being a maniac. So it's not easy to be around a maniac, ever. And I'm enough of a maniac that I get that. People say that to me sometimes. They're like, dude, I'm not going to go into that. You can find that out for yourself. But what I mean by that is, obviously, it's easy enough for people to talk crap, and I'll let you figure that out. I'm not going to talk crap about myself. And And again, but that's one of those things where that's taking maturity for me. Of like, you know what? I used to spend so much damn time beating myself up. And a lot of the reason I did is because I've just always been crippled by how much I love certain musicians or people in other walks of life, you know? And I'm like, God, this person's so amazing, and they're so this and that and the other. And it's like, you can't be them. You just can't ever be them. You can only do what you do and be you. So that's it. And maybe some of that just comes with time and with age of like, oh, well, you know, I'm old now, you know, I'm in my 30s now, and it's like, well, this is it. Actually, this is how this is going to go. This is the brain that I have. This is how this shook out. And just accepting that, I think, is actually an amazing part of personal growth and growth in musicianship. That is the boat we're all in. And I think it actually allows you to be a more empathetic person too. When you're like, you know what? Even people that you meet that you don't really jive with, it's like, theoretically, they're doing the best they can with what they have. And that's the boat we're all in. Now, I want to talk about a little bit more about shredding. Got a few other thoughts on my Van Halen brain dump here. By the way, I'm wearing all black as my homage to Mr. Van Halen. Now, I think one of the issues that people have with shredding is that it's boring, actually, or that it's one-sided, that it's actually not musical, that it is a musical, so to speak. And I think a lot of those people are right, because learning the techniques of high-gain electric guitar playing is, at this point, especially in the internet era, is available to us all. And because it takes quite a bit of dedication and repetition to get these techniques under your command, it's impressive and at a face value, especially to like nerdy dudes, to be able to execute these techniques. The only issue is, in my opinion, it's actually hard to shred in a listenable and unique way. I think it's actually one of the hardest things to do. I think it's very easy to learn a certain, you know, when you're in the guitar world, right? Like, you know, the Paul Gilbert lick, you know that, you're learning your 3 notes per string scales. You've got some of your pentatonic vocabulary. And so it's somewhat easy to learn those things. But what's really hard, extremely hard, is to try and find your own voice within those. And that is what's amazing to me. Couple things about Ed's shredding that just blow me away is that he speaks in complete musical phrases more than almost any shredder I've ever heard. Where a Van Halen solo will have long-held bent notes, you know, mixed in with tremolo picking. You know, so it's like, I don't know if that was very good, but you know what I'm saying? Like a blues lick will a lot of times start off a solo, and let's see. So you know, he'll do like a you know, that kind of thing, and then he'll tie it in to a little bit of technique. Then, you know, after he introduces something with a little blues flavor, then he'll throw in a tapping thing where he can go, you know, some kind of like micro cadence within that solo, right? So what he's done is he's grabbed you with a little soul, and then he's thrown in a little flash, and to my ear, it's just like, God, that is it. That is it. you got what I want to hear as a rock guitar listener. I want to hear a little bit of flash, but it's always a seasoning. And the way that he uses it as a seasoning, he just, no one had done that before him. And if people had done that, it was so in the underground. No one had done that at that level, on that scale. So what I'm saying is he speaks in complete musical sentences, which is very rare as shredders go. And I think what ties into this is, I guess I'll go into this next topic, which is one guitar bands versus two guitar bands, and how important that is in terms of your sound as a player. Now, let's see. I think one of the things I noticed on social media, I follow all my guitar heroes, which include like Eric Johnson, Marty Friedman, Yngwie and stuff. And pretty much all of them have said a personal story, their memory of Ed or with Ed. And universally, people agree with this. Universally. It doesn't even matter if so basically what I'm saying is all of my heroes that are still alive, they all say this. It's just, it can't be overstated how amazing it is and was what he did. And how amazing it was that he brought this whole new lexicon of technique, listenable technique. What is, in my opinion, again, like the gold standard of what shredding should be. He did it and embodied it, and very few guys have, in my opinion, meaningfully improved upon that, which is why he will always be at the root of the tree of inspiration of guitar players, just like Hendrix. It's just unbelievable that it all came together in a person, in a band, in a sound, in a moment in time. And I get with this rant I'm going on, certain people that aren't like really into guitar and music, they're not gonna get, they're like, okay, dude, yeah, Eddie Van Halen's good. But I'm trying to articulate just why I'm so stoked on Van Halen, and I'm so thankful for what he's done. And I think the whole guitar world is. And that's why his passing is so tragic. And yet I don't want to spend too much time focused on the loss. I just want to focus on the gift that he gave, because that is what's amazing, is what he contributed to the guitar world will never die and is so inspiring by being the most him that almost any musician could be. That is the gold standard of musicianship, and he achieved it. And he achieved absolute immortality. His mortality has passed, but he will only, I think, grow in importance with time. And that just is so incredible. Humanity gets so few of these people that it's worth taking this moment to just ruminate on it and how important it is and how wonderful it was that Ed has existed and done what he's done, and that it's I look back on, I've been listening to Van Halen all week, just like everyone. And by the way, if anyone's listening to this in the far future, Ed, I'm recording this, I think 3 or 4 days after Ed's passing. Now, I want to talk about two other topics. Well, 3 topics before I wrap this up. My whole Van Halen brain dump. By the way, I wanted to do this with multiple of my buddies, but again, it's harder to get. It's harder, just like anything in life, right? It's hard to get started with things. It's hard to get momentum with things, and life is full of people, and it's a crazy time. So, did I say life is full? Life is full for people, and so, anyways, doing the best I can here. and having fun. Now, let's talk about one guitar bands versus two guitar bands. I'm going to take a quick drink of water here. Now, I think if you are a really good player as a guitar player, well, let me back up. I think with a lot of things in musicianship, things sort of call you and come to you. As in, if you wind up building your sound as like a guitar player that needs a rhythm guitar player, and I don't say that in a pejorative sense. I say that like some of the greatest guitar players of all time are duos and cannot not be a duo. So Aerosmith, AC/DC, Guns N' Roses / Metallica. Those are two guitar iconic, amazing bands that are, it's unimaginable for them to be one guitar bands. Even the Stones, right? Keith. I've heard him say in multiple interviews that it's not what he does, it's the way that he plays with Ronnie. And what was it? Brian Jones before, rest in peace. It's the way that he plays. It's the sound of the two of them that make this whole that's greater than the parts. And a lot of bands are like that. A lot of bands are like that. And you just couldn't imagine AC/DC as a one guitar band. It has to be the two of them. And yet there are other bands where it's unimaginable that there'd be a second guitar player. Pantera, Chili Peppers, Cream, Hendrix. Now, obviously in the records, there are recorded backing guitars. Let's see, who else? Rush, U2, Tool. So I am fascinated by that like one guitar bands and two guitar bands, there are a number of examples of bands that are undeniably iconic and amazing guitar bands with either permutation. And obviously, talking about Ed, they're a three-piece. Oh, I forgot, Zeppelin, obviously. I mean, there's just too many to even name, right, of the three pieces. Now, the thing is, I'll speak for my own musicianship. I have never actually found satisfaction in either. I found that I want to always be in a project that is a three-piece and always be in a project that is a four-piece, as in a two-guitar band. So, and it's because it's just a different animal. They're different animals. It's different stylistically. It affects everything about how you play and the musical choices that you make and the territory that you can inhabit and the sounds that you can channel. It's just, to me, it's just amazing and very fun to explore these two different avenues. Okay, so let's name real quick the advantages to being a power trio in a musical sense, right? Guitar, bass, drums. Well, first of all, the guitar plays a more prominent role, and yet it has to. So I think in some bands, from what I've read about U2, or early U2, well, and I think for a lot of bands, I think when you have a one guitar band, your style as a player evolves to fill space. And a lot of three-piece bands also, that is the best home for aggressive bass playing. The Who, obviously the Chili Peppers. So Led Zeppelin. When you have a stud bass player, when you have a bass player that is, maybe you could argue, of more of a jazz influenced school, right? Where the guy takes up more sonic territory. And when you think about what that means practically for the bass instrument, that means that he's going oftentimes higher on the neck. And higher on the neck of the bass gets into the low end of the neck on the guitar, right? Because essentially the bass guitar, the low E and the low A strings, so basically half of the bass instrument is truly the bass, and half of the bass, if you think about it in a certain way, is the guitar. And so, when I look at, say, Van Halen, or I look at, it's actually all these iconic 3-piece bands. Chili's, Van Halen, and U2 are some of the greatest examples, in my opinion, of the guitar player, first of all, having more freedom to fill space with effects. So that's modulation. That's all kinds of modulation, right? So that's your reverbs, that's your that's your phasers, flangers, choruses, those kinds of things. Then your time-based effects, your delays, your reverbs. You get to fill more space versus like Slash doesn't play with a lot of reverb. And I bet he's tried it, and it just creates mud, right? Because that space gets filled by the second guitar. And so I actually think it's easier to play with a more straight ahead guitar rig if you're in a 2-piece guitar band, right? Like the Rolling Stones don't need a ton of effects and delays and reverbs, and neither does Metallica. And wah pedal for solos is kind of the archetype. Wah pedal, little delay, maybe on some guitar leads, but that's it. It's very simple. Oh, I'm forgetting, by the way, Rage Against the Machine, one of my other favorite bands, everyone's favorite bands. It's another example of a guitar player that is able to take up more space, and I would argue write his own rule book. So essentially what I'm trying to say is I think being in a 3-piece band where or a solo guitar player, it's more demanding, but there's more freedom. There's more creativity. There's more space that your sound can fill. You have much more of a palette that you can paint with that doesn't get in the way of the other instruments. And yet, you have to be more of a badass. It's more uncompromising. It's more demanding. It's harder. It requires more precision. There's nothing to hide behind. It's frankly kind of fucking scary to be the only guitar player in a band. Speaking as someone who has done both, right? Been in 2 guitar bands and 1 guitar bands multiple times. It's more of a burden to be in a 1 guitar band. It's harder. It's more demanding. For me, it's been more stressful. You have to be more of a badass. Now, the better your bass player is, the less demanding it is as a guitar player. But to bring it back around to Van Halen, Michael Anthony is a great bass player, in my opinion. I know a lot of people would argue with that. And, and Wolfie is amazing too. But he's not of that, bass stud caliber. And we all know that, right? He's not like... he's not John Paul Jones. He's not Flea. He's not, because those are... But the thing is, Ed takes up so much space. He has such a huge sonic footprint that it wouldn't work if he was busier. And it's just infinitely amazing to me how the best bands find that. They find... Every great band has their own variation of this, of finding out which instrument fills what area of space, and each musician develops their own sound around the other's relative strengths and weaknesses. And that is what being in a band is about. That is the magic. That is the pursuit. That is the joy. And and so with Van Halen, Ed's just got such a massive sound. You just can't overstate it. The other thing is, I think in hard rock music, the interplay between the guitar and drums is really the nature of the beast, with the exception of the few bass hero bands that exist, the Chili Peppers being a great example, right? But that interplay between the guitar and drums. So I would say, for example, Pantera is so much indebted to Van Halen, as we all know, and as Dime was very upfront about. But that it's that, like that. If you're into that style of hard rock music, it's just the drums, the way that the drums play with the guitar. I would argue that 9 times out of 10 in heavy rock music, that is what it's all about. That is it. Guitar, drums, and the bass is usually mirroring some badass aggressive guitar player. But again, since we're talking about Van Halen, Ed wrote the damn book on that, on the heavy rock formula and the importance of drums and guitar as the essence of hard rock music. All right. Well, I think that's probably enough said. I just think that the difference between 2 guitar and 1 guitar bands is just, it's so much of the fun of rock and guitar playing to me, to think about those differences and the differences in sound. And anyways, that's what it's all about. All right. 2 more things. I actually need to take a quick break. Be right back. 2 more topics I want to touch on here. One, I think the Van Halen brotherhood is something that's incredibly powerful. Now, when you have an actual blood bond between members of a band, that is obviously, if not the strongest, one of the strongest forces that you can have in any human endeavor. Now, for anyone who's listening, which I assume is almost everyone, you're a musician and you've been in bands or started bands or have some familiarity with bands. It's hard to have a band. It's hard to start a band. Actually, starting a band is the easy part. It's hard to keep a band going for any amount of time. It is something that is, and I think no matter what level you're at, it's difficult. You have your problems to solve at an introductory level that are a freaking chore. And I would imagine success creates its own problems within bands, right? Of at least if you're not successful, you don't have to deal with any real money related things because no one's making any money. It would suck if those discussions came into it. And if I imagine it being infinitely complicated and difficult when you're talking about people's livelihoods and ability to feed children being contingent on, well, did you actually write that bass line or not? I just do not envy people in that situation. And I've never had that myself. And I think that a lot of the things you look forward to and love about music, that part of it would be very difficult. But what I'm saying is the power of brotherhood. If we're going to look at a couple of our favorite acts in hard rock and heavy metal, namely Pantera, AC/DC, and Van Halen, Kings of Leon, I'd say, are another one, where there is a group of brothers that blood bond, in my opinion, is an extremely important part of their success and longevity. The other thing is when you look at groups like U2 and the Chili Peppers, and Rush, so a lot of these other iconic bands, they have been friends since like middle school. So that's close. That's as close as you're going to get to brotherhood. But to me, it is very noteworthy how one of those 2 things has occurred in a lot of the bands that we know and love that have stood the test of time and particularly had multiple productive decades. It's one of those 2 things: childhood friends or brotherhood. And I have thought because I've had so many struggles myself with building bands and creating bands and keeping them together, that's partially where this has come from for me, is I look at these bands that I love and I'm like, oh, that's why. That's a lot of the reason why they're still together. It's because they have that deep, deep bond that they've built, the deep amount of trust, that deep, there's a lot of talk in the world right now about all the divisiveness that is going on in, political things, and I don't want to spend any time talking about that. But the issue is, when you look at the root cause of a lot of that, apparently in human evolutionary history, in human history, the vast majority of human development and human evolution, especially in a social sense, occurred in the context of small tribes. We are an inherently tribal species. And so this tribalism means that, like, we're an in-group and you're an out-group. And that wiring, apparently and clearly, through humanity's past, through the vast majority of humanity, has been an advantageous trait. We know who's in. We know who we trust. We know who we like. We know. And when you're with us, we act this way. We think this way. We talk this way. We do this. We don't do that. We don't think that. We don't look like that. And so those things are just how human beings are. And so one of the issues that does seem to be plaguing the world right now is we're having to face that issue, that is that human beings are inherently tribal, and that in-group, out-group thing obviously leaves a lot of people out, and that creates a lot of pain and suffering, and nobody wants that. We want to maximize well-being for everyone. I don't want to spend much time on that topic, though, but what I'm saying is that idea of tribalism, well, when you make a band, you make a tribe. It's a micro-tribe, and then your fans are also part of that tribe. That is literally what it is. A band is a tribe, and so is a fan base. And so one of the ways to, in my opinion, like, bands that started young and the members of the band grew up together and came of age musically together, it is inescapably powerful as far as creating a unique generation-defining sound. Because when you come of age, it's kind of like, apparently the statistics show that, the younger, well, I'm not going to talk about things I'm not an expert on, but I'm just going to use an anecdotal evidence. Some of the people that I know that seem to have the most successful long-term relationships are people that have been together a long time. Like I think a lot of people know perhaps that couple that were high school sweethearts and they're still together. Now, that's pretty rare in the modern world, but it does still happen. And it does seem like that is some of those couples where it's like they celebrate their 60th wedding anniversary or whatever. That just seems to be it, right? Of like, when you build a bond young enough in life, your identity develops with a person. And that is so true in bands, that coming of age musically together, and as you are becoming who you are and who you're going to be, if that is very tied to someone else, you actually develop this sort of beautiful mutual codependency with another person, this person that's really close to you. But that is what so often, that deep, deep set of roots is what anchors powerful creativity down the road. And so Van Halen, to me, is such a shining example of that the Van Halen brothers, and then of course adding in Wolfgang at a later phase, and apparently Ed is very family oriented. In everything I've read that's obituary oriented, people say that about him. And that to me doesn't surprise me one bit. That seems extremely in line with what I'm talking about here, that like the power of blood, it's just a thing. And so I would argue, like, if you're a young musician listening to this, or an aspiring musician, You know, if you can find people, if you can start a band with your childhood friends and grow together, or be in a band with your family, go for it. Go for it and go all in on that, because that is one of the best chances you will have at actually being really, at having a real amazing sound later down the road. If you can do that as a young musician and get going with it, you might surprise yourself or the world with what's possible. Now, I will say, I'll talk about my own life. I know that the first band I had with my childhood friends, when we were coming together, that just didn't pan out. That didn't, people's life paths take different routes, and particularly people prioritize music in a different way, right? For some people, music doesn't take front row center in their priority list, and that is fine. But I'm just saying, those bands where the compass is all pointed in the same direction, young, unbelievably powerful. The other thing is, I think it helps you to weather the storm. I look at bands that, particularly maybe the two most successful bands of having multiple singers being AC/DC and Van Halen. Having at least two iconic singers in two iconic eras of these iconic bands. Guess what? They're brothers. Is that a coincidence? I don't think so at all. And I think it's because you're always going to have a majority rule. It's always going to be clear what the direction of the band is and who's calling the shots. If you're in AC/DC, you're in the Young Brothers band. Or if you're in Van Halen, guess what? If the name wasn't clear enough to you, you know who's calling the shots. And for people that are willing to play ball with that, and again, I am not trying to say that I have any understanding of what, I'm sure it would be extremely trying to be in that band dynamic, because it would be very demanding. It would not be a fair, egalitarian, everyone has a fair vote thing. That's not what it is. And yet, there is value to that. There are certainly positive outcomes there with having a dictatorship, with having brotherhood or tight friendship that sets clearly the direction of the band and a decision-making hierarchy in the band. Because I've been in quite a few projects where that is the freaking problem of, you're not going to agree in a band on a lot of things. And then it needs to be a thing where, then how do you resolve those conflicts? And it is freaking hard to have a democracy in a band. And part of the reason you can't ever have a true democracy in a band is because most of the time it's not an even keel load bearing in a band, right? It's like, you know what I'm saying? In most bands, there's a primary songwriter or a songwriting team in the band that writes the music, and the other members will usually contribute in some way, but they're not fundamental. Every band's different in how they write. But what I'm saying is, however a band finds a way to make it work, that is one of the main things that breaks up bands, is there's not a clear vision and decision-making hierarchy through time. And so Brotherhood solves that. And in Van Halen's case, we have to tip the hat to Alex, to how he is so a part of what Eddie became, even as a guitar player, that their story is so entwined, and that is the magic of, you can't really talk about Ed without talking about Alex and how important that is to Ed's sound and Ed's contribution and the way that Ed played and the way those two locked in together. It's a blood bond and you hear it. So that's amazing. So thank you, Alex. Final thing, and I'm going to try and talk about this subject with delicacy, with sensitivity. substances in rock music and substance abuse. And I think that is just one of the things that I want to talk about briefly as far as Ed. Obviously, cancer is what ended up being his battle. And apparently he said that he believes the metal guitar pick that he used and held in his mouth was a lot of the cause of that. And who knows, maybe it was. Maybe it was like half lead or something. And I don't know. But apparently, I mean, he's very much a part of the rock and roll circus for a while. And he definitely smoked a lot for some period of his life. And I guess the only thing I want to say on that subject is it's easy to say if you have never really been in the rock and roll circus. It's easy to say, well, why can't it just be about the music? And it can be, but it is so much easier said than done that I don't know. It's just one of those things that sounds good and is very hard in practice. It's really hard, especially because certain kinds of music are like party music and it's inescapable, right? And particularly Van Halen. They're a party band. They're a bar rock band. So how could you have a bar rock band and not rage? It's so drug, sex, rock. It's so much a part of what rock is, and yet, excuse me. What I'm saying, I guess the point I wanted to make is twofold. One, the amount of contribution that Ed made to the world in the amount of years that he had, and there's so many heroes that their time was much shorter on the earth, right? I would have hoped, I don't know these details, but I would have hoped that he was happy with the mark that he made, because there's so many people that live longer and didn't live in their life nearly as much. And the life that just effervesced, the channeling of the gift that Ed had. I would just hope, like, I don't know what thoughts went through his mind, in his final days, but man, I would hope that he was very happy with the mark that he made. I would hope he was satisfied. I just really hope that. I would be very surprised if he wasn't. And I would be surprised too if he regretted a whole lot of like, well, what if I didn't party so much? Because maybe at some level that created some of the circumstances of the cancer that he battled with. Well, but that was all part of it, is what I'm saying. Like, he who knows what riffs and ideas came from the lifestyle that he was living. Who knows if it was like this warm-up session, this sound check at this shitty bar where he was already a couple drinks in at this phase in his life. That is what created his sound. That's what led to, it's just, that's the way that life works, right? Is those little moments and those little things. You can't have the good without the bad. I don't think he could have developed the sound that he did without living in the lifestyle that he did. And so that lifestyle that does and might have and probably shortened his life in some capacity is also part of what made his contribution. It's part of what made his gift so great. And I just think that that's a really funny thing. I think that's a funny thing that, like, so many times in life we want to think we're going to live to be whatever age it is. I'm going to live to 100. I mean, I think a lot of people would be like, yeah, I'd love to live to 100. But what if you had to live a lifestyle that was a little bit more high octane, but it meant that from middle age on, you might have health problems that other people don't in middle age. And what kind of trade-off is that? Like, and I don't think there's any easy answers to that, but I guess all I'm trying to say is I'm certainly glad that Ed made all the choices that he did because of the gift that he was able to give. And you can't separate sometimes even those non-musical things, the people that were in his life, the way that those people that he probably met in the party scene and, you know, in the Hollywood Strip and everything, those people that he met in those party environments and the party lifestyle, that is so much of what made his sound. And so if some of the downwind consequences of partying are, you know, mortality related, well, it's almost like if you look at anyone that really lives life on the edge, like a warrior of any kind, you know, like modern day warriors would be like UFC guys or football players, you know, it's just a really tough thing of, well, I guess you could live a safer life and, you know, you cannot fly as high, basically. You and not play with fire like that. You're probably not going to get as burned, but you also might not have that chance to really discover what's on the edge of the human experience. So I guess that's it. I'm glad that Ed was one of those people. And you know, partying in general is just a very funny thing that I just don't think you can demonize partying. I don't think it's wise to say you should never party and never do certain substances or this, that, or the other, because where would we be as a society without those artists that have done that and pushed that and pioneered, you know, I don't know. It's just a funny thing. On one hand, selfishly, I'm like, well, maybe Ed would still be here if he hadn't lived that way. But then maybe Ed wouldn't be Ed if he hadn't. And that is no one can answer those questions. And frankly, some of it's just not fair either, right? Of like other notorious partiers, Alice Cooper, Steven Tyler, some of those guys, you know, Keith Richards, Lemmy from Motorhead, he actually had a pretty good run given how hard he went. So some people, Joe Walsh, some people seem to burn the candle real brightly young and they luck out and they stay with us for a long time. And for some people, they don't. And that is just truly one of those hands that you're dealt from fate and from destiny. And from where I sit, that's an individual choice everyone has to make, right? Of how hard do you go in the partying sense? And it's just partying in general. You can't totally demonize it. You can't demonize it if you love rock and roll. You can't say all those guys would have been better. It wouldn't have existed. It's impossible to conceive of rock and roll without partying, without raging, without alcohol and smoking and staying out way late and just doing, quote, irresponsible things that frankly most people can't do. Most people just can't live that way and sustain an income and a family and whatnot. And yet we all know that generally those things have health consequences, and it's just this double-edged sword of what partying is. It's simultaneously amazing, wonderful, productive, and creative, and also tragic, sad, dangerous. And yet that's the nature of the beast, and I'm glad that Ed took the path that he did. I guess that's all I'm trying to say. With that. All right, well, those are pretty much all my thoughts on Van Halen. And I just felt like taking this moment to let my thoughts wander on the master that he was, the life that he lived, the legacy that he's left. Because music is so important to me, and his music has taken up such a big slice of pie of my whole musical thought process. I just wanted to do a brain dump on that, and I hope that for anyone listening, that it helped you to have your own reflections on Ed and on Van Halen and on the music and what it's meant to all of us. So again, thank you, Ed. Thank you for all that you've done. And you are so missed